Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA on a Tuesday morning. Honored to have our next guest up. He is running for the Senate seat presently held by Pat Toomey. He is a former Admiral. He's a Congressman and a candidate, as we said. Now he is Joe Sestak, who's been on our show many times before, and always good to have Joe on. Good morning, Joe. How you doing?
Good to be with you again, Gary. I'm doing very well.
Good to have you back. Last we talked, you were on a walking tour. You're kind of doing some other walking right now. Tell us a little bit about what's going on.
I am. After I finished the 422-mile walk across Pennsylvania, because I think Pennsylvanians, like all Americans, rightly don't trust leaders of, frankly, I think both parties. I wanted to try to earn their trust. I then did a walking tour, 12 places for approximately 12, for the 12 chapters of my book, Walking in Your Shoes to Restore the Dream. Now I'm going to counties. I just finished last week walking between the cities of Wilkes-Barre and Scranton. I'm now on Thursday going to be walking in Indiana County from Homer City over to Indiana City itself. And I want people to know that I do want to walk through the main streets and on down the rural roads and listen to them and talk and then be held accountable for the policies they need to restore the dream for Americans here in Pennsylvania.
What is the dream for Americans right now, Joe? A lot of us are searching for that again. It's a shame to have to say that, but we are, because we think it's in a lot of places. I think whether you're on the right or left side of the coin, there are a lot of people that think we've lost it.
What it is the opportunity, not the guarantee, but the opportunity that your children could do better than you. I mean, that's always happened with every generation. A great study by two conservative think tanks, two liberal think tanks came together in about 2005, and their study concluded that the American dream had stopped. Those who are in about their mid-40s today are the first generation, when you consider all their income, that did not do better than their parents. It's not a guarantee, but it's an opportunity in America that people like my father emigrated here to do. And that's why the concern is that today, the medium level of income, that is all benefits included as well as wages, the medium level of income, the exact middle of working families, that level today is $1,200 less than it was in 1999. That means over 50% of working families are earning less in real income than they did in 1999. And so the concern is there really the opportunity for their children to make it today?
From your vantage point, what's causing the holdback today on income? I mean, a lot of us sit out there and we look at a nation that seems to be overregulated, overtaxed, wasteful spending, redundant spending, and I continue to hear the mantra from people saying, "Oh, we want to raise up the middle class, we want to help the middle class," and then I look at things like, for example, our governor right now in the state of Pennsylvania who screams about helping the middle class, and then he says, "Oh, I want to take more of your money next year." And knowing in our state we have a lot of money where we could probably cut some corners right now, and we're not looking at that first, but we're looking at taxing more. So I'd like to know how some of these people get away with coming out and saying, "I want to help the middle class." Well, how do you help them by taking more of their money they could be spending authentically themselves on their families and on the economy and on other people?
Well, I, as you know from the military, want to know what the facts are. So after I did not win the Senate race, I turned down the lobbying jobs that 435 congressmen and senators took. I mean, my wife said, "Are you sure?" when I told her about the seven-figure offers. But I went to teach, and that's a lot of where my book came from, but it also came from listening to people. The number one issue here in Pennsylvania, without a question, and across America, I would argue, is small business growth. Here's the issue. We know today that we are creating half the small businesses per 10,000 working Americans. Only half as many as we did in 1975. Now, small businesses back then and today created 70% of all jobs. If our star job creator, small business, is only on the football field for 18 jobs per every 10,000 citizens instead of 36 like it used to be in the 70s, something's wrong. And so I went to look at it. And you're right on part of it. Regulation on small businesses, it costs a small business of less than 20 employees about 40% more to deal with the heavy regulation on them. But there's a second issue, too, access to capital. Those startup companies that go all the way to a public offering, 60% get offered venture capital. Today, last year, only 1,000 out of the 600,000 small business sprung up got offered venture capital. Now, in my book, I address specifically address how to relieve the regulatory burden on small businesses, because there's a law passed in 1999 that said small business can be at the table to make sure it doesn't get imposed on them when they're doing the EPA study regulation. The other one is access to the Mother's Milk campaign money to start up. Last thing, though, in Pennsylvania, guess what, Gary? In Pennsylvania, over the past, it isn't just this governor, it isn't just the governor before, the last 40 years, small business growth in Pennsylvania has been half of the nation's average. That's why our job creation here has been approximately half the nation's average. So let's focus on small businesses, relieving the burden on them, and making sure they get the access to capital to start up. And that's what my book talks about.
Yeah, a lot of people aren't aware that you were vice president or vice chairman of the Small Business Committee when you were in Congress. And you said when you told your constituents that, you said the only reason I got it was nobody else wanted it, right?
Yeah, well, and here's why. And Gary, there's no PAC money for small businesses. Everybody talks small businesses, but Democrats and Republicans, none of them went there. I was asked to be vice chairman when I asked to be on the committee. I said, why'd you be vice chairman? Now, everybody wants to go to the Appropriations Committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee. Why? The Ways and Means Committee, because that's where the moneyed interests give you the PAC money.
You know, it's amazing right now. We look at this, and I've got some callers in this morning too, Joe. I'm going to sprinkle them in along the way here.
Absolutely.
But one of the things that people are concerned about are taxes, and one of the things, obviously, here in Pennsylvania, property taxes has been a big subject ever since really 1972.
Right.
So we got Tom in Wrightsville who has a question about that. Tom, you're on the Gary Sutton Show with Joe Sestak. Go ahead, Tom. Your turn to make the call.
Hi, Tom.
Okay. Hey, how's it going? I was just came in here for lunch and picked you up here. I listened to Gary Sutton up. I said, I got to try to get in. To restore, if you're looking for confidence from people, the property taxes, okay? Now, this is something that's been mulled about for 40 years in Pennsylvania, and I don't know if we're going to have any chances of that with the governor we have now. But I can give you some perspective. I was born in York. And when I was 8 years old, my family moved to Long Island for a job opportunity. I moved back from Long Island as soon as I could, and what I see in Pennsylvania, right now we're at a fork in the road. My property taxes have tripled since I've been living in the house since 1990. And what will happen is people are going to be taxed out of their houses. I've seen it in Long Island. My brother's home, he moved back to Long Island. I moved back to York County here as well. His little two-bedroom 1950s vintage home on a small lot, his taxes and insurance went to $13,000.
Right.
Now, what I see right now is there's no way I'd like to leave and start over again. I'm 60 years old. My wife and I are going to West Virginia frequently, looking over Buchanan, Elkins, those areas, for a possible place to relocate, because Social Security, if it still functions in a couple of years, will provide a good basis to be able to make a move, because I do not want to be in my 70s and when I need it the most to be taxed out of my house.
On property taxes especially, yep.
Right. Yep, schools. There's some, as far as I know, a few years ago, a gentleman from Berks County, I think I might have heard it on the Gary Sutton Show, had an idea to tax food and clothing, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it was Sam Rohr, who was a representative for near Berks County, and yeah, he was going to include that in the sales tax, and it was an idea of wiping out property tax. Yeah, that was part of it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and not, see, now what could likely happen, excuse the trucks over here, I'm parked at the Rudders. I can see the typical thing happening. There will be all over the newspapers, property tax relief, and it'll be $200, something nonsense, and they'll take $500 out of my other pocket.
Right.
This, from what I understand, this plan was to eliminate property taxes and charge food and clothing. Now, I mentioned that to somebody, and they said to me, yeah, but then that means that people that have a lot of kids are going to have to pay a lot of money. And I said, well, isn't that fair? So this is one of the things, property taxes, and I'll sum up my phone call. I appreciate your time, but we're right here at a crossroads, at least here in York County, right, where if the property taxes keep increasing, you're going to have your baseline working class tax paying people are going to be starting to move out.
Well, Tom, let me get a reaction here from Joe, and thank you for your call, and never an inconvenience to call in. So, Joe, obviously a very big concern by a citizen here in York County.
Yeah, look, I think he's spot on about property taxes. I've spoken about this before, and the reason I think he's spot on about it is, we're like the second oldest nation for those above the age of 65, and when you look at those above the age of 80, we're the oldest state in the nation. And property taxes is so burdensome. You could use the word quite unfair for this senior population of ours. And you heard him talk, Tom did, about when he gets 70 and all. We have to come to a means to relieve them of this burden upon when they're older. And then when you look at it, you've got to look at what seniors spend their money on. It's food.
Right.
Okay, well, that'll be a tax under the other proposal. Medicine and housing. There's a fourth one. I've forgotten it off the top of my head because I looked at this issue. And so how do you make sure that the revenues that are needed to sustain the roads are able to be gotten by a different type of proposal on the income tax? But here's the issue. You can't even get Democrats and Republicans sit down together to try to say, okay, what's the mechanism to relieve the property tax that we can have X, Y, and Z instead to have the sufficient revenues? Part of the problem is some want no revenues. Some part of the problem is a lot of the money is not accountable. And so how do you get it back that you get it replaced by something else, but it is held accountable and we don't have the waste that happens, like in Medicare today, we have $60 billion a year. That is fraud, waste, or abuse. How do we have an accountable system to have the proper revenues that do the roads and the other types of issues that we do need to sustain?
And we also look at something like Social Security. Big headlines out this morning that Social Security, the cost of living is not going to be going up on that. The no COLA hike, gas prices are to blame. They say it's down and that there's really not any inflation at all. We'll ask a lot of people out there on fixed incomes right now how they feel about that, or go check in the grocery store and see if you can't see inflation. There is inflation involved. But, a lot of the things that we've counted on before as part of or supplemental to our other savings and so forth are kind of going by the wayside here.
Yeah, first off, I forgotten if I sponsored or co-sponsored that. First of all, Social Security money is put in a lockbox. I know others have said that, but let me move to your very good point. This inflation rate, making sure that the right one is there for Social Security, we basically the increase of the inflation rate is based on a family of, as Tom mentioned, with kids, etc.
Right.
And instead of saying the inflation rate should be based on a basket of what seniors have to be concerned about as they go on Social Security: food, medicine, housing. And then you can get the right increase because that's what they need their money for. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I want to come back here, Joe. I want to take a quick break. I want to come back, ask you a little bit more about some of the other issues that are in your book, too. And by the way, if you've not seen Joe's book, it's Walking in Your Shoes to Restore the American Dream. Joe Sestak, along with Jake Sternberger, he wrote this. And where can you find your book, by the way, Joe?
On my website. It's on Amazon, but it is also on my website, joesestak.com. joesestak.com.
There you go. We're going to come right back with Joe after this and talk more about his candidacy. What would he do differently than what's being done right now by, for example, Senator Toomey here in representing the state of Pennsylvania? Those are legitimate questions. We'll ask Joe that when we come back here on the Gary Sutton Show. It's News Radio 910 WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA with Joe Sestak, former Admiral, former Congressman, now candidate to run for the seat presently held by Senator Pat Toomey. Joe, I understand. I think I'm right on this. Today is the 240th birthday of the United States Navy. Is that correct?
Yeah.
How's that?
What
I thought you might be interested in that, right?
Say that again?
I said I thought you might be interested in that one.
Yes. And the Naval Academy that I graduated from just had its birthday this past weekend.
There you go.
That's a great October, isn't it?
There it is. And Navy's playing pretty good football, too, right?
The last 12 years, I think they're 12-0 against Army. I did the Pledge of Allegiance yesterday in Westmoreland County, and at the end I went to the microphone after I finished it. I normally say, go Navy, beat Army, but I didn't think you civilians out there would appreciate it. What's he doing?
I want to ask you something. We had a guy on this morning, John LeBoutelier, who's on Political Insiders on the Fox News channel. He's also a former congressman. He has been going back on his own dollar, even as a congressman, back since the early 1980s, to Laos to try to free the 600 men who are still there. And he told us the whole story this morning about how the United States government, and particularly George H.W. Bush as the head of the CIA, has kept this quiet, and that these people have been we offered to bring them back home, or have been offered to us to bring back home, and we have not taken that. And these people are still languishing there. And it's most.
This is where I missed that.
In Laos.
Laos.
And guys who fought in the Vietnam War.
I know what you're talking about.
And we're wondering, what do you do? I mean, to a guy like you who has served, this has got to be like one of the most despicable things. Our country is supposed to represent something and stand for something. And you talk in your one chapter 9 here in your book, about serving those who served. And you say there, and yet too often our leaders in Washington have failed to honor the work that these veterans have done for our nation and the sacrifices they have made. We hear an awful lot of rhetoric from our leaders. We hear a lot of people say, well, we leave no man behind, and yet here we know there's at least 600, and probably less than that now because they're getting older, who've been left behind in prison camps, and we're not doing anything to go back and get them, and yet we go get someone like Bo Bergdahl out, or we have this Washington Post guy we're talking about right now in Iran who's been held for over a year now. How do you react to that when you hear that kind of thing, that our government is behind that?
Look, I'm extraordinarily disappointed. My wife did work for the prisoner of war MIA office in Office of Secretary of Defense. Flew over because she speaks Russian. She went to Middlebury and went into the archives of the former Soviet Union after it broke apart, searching for records for downed airmen of the United States Air Force and Navy in North Korea to see where the Soviet Union, when they had been flying planes against us in that 1951-53 war, where they had gone down, so we could then go to North Korea, that hermit kingdom ruled by the tyrant, and try to get them out. We've been doing that. And just one Russian general said to her, why, as she was sitting there going through searching these archives day and night, just because she only had limited time they'd give her to find these records, said, why do you Americans care so much about those in a war? Because we do. That's who we are. Those who go forward are double the citizen. How can we not bring them home? And or those who assist us, someone who put their life on the line for us, for example, in Iraq, and getting them out safely. We owe that to them too.
And yet, we have the very government you're talking about here who has left these people behind to rot. And we're doing nothing to get them out. As a senator, what would you do? I mean, that's not being done now. And John said this morning, having been a former congressman like yourself, he said, you go to the Pentagon, you get this canned letter, and basically says, well, it's this is what it is. Why aren't we raising heaven and hell to try to go over and get these people out of there? I guess that's a major question I have.
Yeah.
And what would you do as a senator to do more in that regard, especially with the background that you have?
I would do the same thing I did, even though it's slightly certain circumstances. Persistence is the thing that is most valuable in a public servant. We had in that first Iraq war, it's a little different example, but to show you what can prevail, to not say no from our government, that we stuck in, I worked into the defense budget, that we had prisoners of war in the first Iraq war who then we got out, okay? But they had the right to restitution under international law, won their case in a U.S. court. And we stuck it in because the Bush administration, and by the way, this went into the Obama administration too,
right,
wouldn't give them the money back because we held the assets. We got it into the bill. It got vetoed because of that. The president sent it back. And then what we did is we couldn't get it in again. So we went to court. And eventually we got it done. Look, that is the reason I kept my office open 7 days a week as a congressman. You are a public servant. You could come in any day and you work it. You don't accept those form letters. There's a prison of war MIA office in there that is tasked with the responsibility to make sure those MIAs and POWs come home. I just was working with a woman in Lebanon County over the last few years who finally got the remains of her grandfather be recognized to go search for I think it's in Burma, as I remember. Yeah. It's persistence.
Well, and we need some of that right now. Not only persistence by people like you who might be elected to this and who have been elected, and we thank you for your service, not only in this service, but by people who are supposed to be doing that job in the first place in the bureaucracy and elsewhere. Joe, it's been too long. I hope we can do it again very, very soon, my friend.
I would. Gary, have a great day.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate you taking the time.
Bye-bye.
Joe Sestak with us on the Gary Sutton Show.